Today we're going to talk about shading. Shading has to do with the element of value, which is the degree of lightness and darkness and infinite variety of grays in between. Shading is what allows an object to look three-dimensional. For instance, here's a drawing that one of my art students did that used shading. There's several different techniques for using it, but let's talk a little bit about light and how it works. Light falls logically, and so sometimes when people are talking about using value or shading, they talk about light logic. Light, where it hits an object, is called the highlight area. That's the area that is the lightest. And then you have an area called the cast shadow. That's the shadow that is cast by an object onto, like for instance, my fingers. If a light source was working right, it would cast a shadow onto like the paper behind it. And then you have something called the crest shadow, which is that shadow that rounds. It starts light and kind of transitions and gradates and gets a little darker maybe as it rolls around the side of that object. And then sometimes you have a fourth component called reflected light. And reflected light is when light bounces off an object that is back here and hits maybe a shadow area, and there might be an area of light maybe a little bit inside of there. So as you see, this object looks three-dimensional because of the way they used value. Same way for this drawing where they used value, lights, darks, and grays in between, and then same for this drawing as well. So these are some examples of shading. Now, there are several different techniques that you can use to shade, but the one we're going to focus on today is blending. Okay? Now, if you don't have a blending sheet like this, then you can create one in your sketchbook. You can just simply take a ruler and you can create a rectangle that is about 10 inches long, make it about 1 inch wide, and then mark it off about every inch. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to create, we'll have white, just the white of the paper, going all the way to the darkest value possible. And then you'll also be doing the same thing here, but without the lines. Here we're going to try to create transitions and gradations between the values. And then we'll talk possibly in a different video about what we're going to try to do down here with blending. Blending, primarily what makes blending is that you are pushing into the lead, into the pencil, with an object besides your pencil. A lot of people use their fingers, and fingers can work. They're convenient, they're handy. Some of the disadvantages of using fingers is that it does create a bit of a mess. You have to do a little extra erasing, do a lot of extra cleaning. It can leave stains on your paper because there's oils in your fingers, and so sometimes like some fingerprints won't erase because of that. Probably the biggest reason why it's best not to use fingers, if you can help it, especially if it's going to be an artwork of lasting significance, is that whenever you're rubbing with your fingers and the oil gets into the lead, if you have to go back and lighten it up, you'll be able to erase away a lot of the pencil, but because the oils have mixed with that lead or that graphite into that paper, it's going to make it a little harder to erase away, whereas if it was just the pure lead and you were just pushing a blending stump into it, you wouldn't have the oils there and it would erase a little lighter. It just gives you more flexibility. So that's just something to think about. As far as what you could use to blend, the best blending tool I know is a school paper towel. Besides buying a store-made blending stumps you can buy at the store, school-made paper towel is great. It's not really comfortable for personal use, but it is great for art. It's got a nice rough consistency. You can use regular white paper towels at home. It doesn't work quite as well as this, but it's not bad. You can even roll up a separate piece of paper to it, but it's a little slicker, and so it doesn't work. You want something that's got a little bit of a grab to it. I even did some experiments here where I show the difference, and you'll notice that graphite's really reflective, so sometimes on the camera it may reflect a little bit, but this is using white paper towel, not bad, brown paper towel, which I think is better, and then this is using just white printer paper, and you can see the lines really show up. And what we want to try to avoid today when we do blending is that we are going to try to hide the lines as much as we can. Sometimes in art and shading you want lines to show. So if you need to pause the video, if you want to do this with me while I'm doing it, you can pause the video. You can go ahead and draw maybe just this scale for now and just mark it off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the blackest black over here. And I like to use the edge of the side of my pencil. I don't like to use the tip of it. The tip of the pencil sometimes can dig a trench into the paper, and so what happens is later when you go to blend it, there's going to be like a ditch in the paper, and so sometimes a white line will show up where you don't want one. And so using the side is a little bit better. I recommend trying to control it a little bit, maybe keep some other sheets of paper underneath it for padding. That can help. You can turn the paper around. Occasionally you're going to see the light reflecting off of this graphite. You want to keep the pencil strokes really close together. Now, if we were going to use the pencil and only the pencil alone, if we weren't going to use a blending stump of any kind, usually that's called continuous tone shading. That's where you simply use pressure and layers, and that's it. The only blending that happens is the pencil pushing down or lightly layering over previous layers. And it is, you can create beautiful artwork that way, but it takes a really, really long time. And for the time frame that we have, blending's better. It's faster, it's quicker, you get a more immediate result. And I'm thinking that some of you guys would probably like that. Now what I've got this covered pretty good, but I haven't blended it yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend it. Now, on the school paper towel, if you ever had access to any of that, the best way to do it is just take an edge and just pull a little bit like that. Just tear a little strip like that. And don't try to use like a big old paper wad of it. You can't control that if you do that. And so take that paper, whether you're using this or even white paper towel, and take that strip and fold it and keep doubling it over until it's really tight and compact. And you can even fold it in half like this. And it's going to allow you to press into that pencil really, really nicely. So you go in and you push. And you can either do it back and forth, you can do it in circular motions, but I would try to stay in the lines. I mean, if you go outside the lines, you could erase, but it's just going to create more work for you. And you may have to do it anyway, even if you are careful. But try to avoid creating more work than you absolutely have to. Okay? Now, I might have to go back on this and add more layers later. See, it's kind of shiny, kind of reflective. I can go ahead and put another layer and make it blacker. I may do that before it's over, but I'm probably going to skip to some other levels because I'm not going to do this entire thing for you today. I'm just going to show you how to do it. But one thing to know about lead or graphite, as you're working it, sometimes you'll put a layer, you'll blend it, you'll put another layer down, you'll blend it, and then eventually, as you keep blending, you're going to find that it looks darker. After 2 or 3 layers, it's going to look darker before you blend it. And that's because eventually, unless you spray fix this with some kind of spray fixative that kind of is a protective layer that allows you to kind of work on top of that layer, what can happen is that the paper towel that you're using for a blending stump is actually kind of pulling the lead off of the paper, making it lighter. So if you've done this 2 or 3 times, sometimes you can just lightly shade it with a pencil by itself, and then as long as the lines don't show, then you can leave it. You wouldn't have to blend hard at all or just barely blend it, if any. Now I do want to show you a neat little trick. See how I've built up some graphite on here? I'm going to go to number 5. This should be like the middle, like white. This is going to be pure white. This is going to be as black as you can get it with graphite, which is not really a true black because it's more of a silver gray, but we get it pretty dark. This should be like the middle. But if I sometimes I can take a blending stump and I can use it as a drawing tool. I can come in and create value. Now the only downside is I could run out of lead on here before I get it all done. You want this entire square to be covered equally. You don't want one part being darker than another. You want to have a consistent value layer. I probably would rely more on using the pencil than using this as a tool by itself, but when you're doing some later drawing projects, it can be helpful when you're blending taking an area and working in some lighter shadows with your blending stump, whether it be a store-bought one or whether it be a paper towel. Now, as far as doing the lighter values, like here's number 1, we'll leave it white. Well, for number 2, what we're going to do is we're going to use very, very light pencil pressure. What I recommend is holding the pencil maybe really far back from the pencil, because if you're like me, I have a tendency to want to push down real hard naturally. It's just my personality, that's my bent. So if I hold it way back here, I can concentrate, because I'm not holding it naturally, I can like hold it a lot more lightly, and I'm going really light, and I'm keeping the pencil strokes really close together. If you don't keep the pencil strokes close together, when you go to blend it, the lines are going to show up. And I'll try to show you an example of that. Try not to double over any of the layers that you've done. I haven't 100% covered this with pencil, but it's kind of crumbly when I blend it. It's going to help. Now I wouldn't go in and start using this dark side of the blending stump because it's going to be too dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and bend it back the other way and use the clean side. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to start blending. And I want to hide the lines in this case. Now, lines can be great in art. They can be very expressive and gestural. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to achieve smoothness. We're trying to achieve some control. Because maybe, if we have time, we're going to do some things that will make the light look like it's falling realistically. Okay. And that's not bad, you know, that's like a 20% gray. But if that's too dark, we could always erase it, and we could come back later and blend it. Up here, we want to create some darker values by using more pressure. Now, here are some sample examples I've used in the past, as you can compare as you're trying to get. If you put your pencil down on the line and you can tell a difference between, like, this one's lighter than this one, so that would not be acceptable. I want it to go from white to dark, and I want it to go in order. Here is another one. That's a little more complete if you see it, but you don't want light edges. If there's light edges, you want to gently put some pencil in and blend it out and make it smooth and even as you can. I might show you a couple of student examples in just a moment. Let me go ahead and talk to you about this one. This one's a lot harder to do than this one. In here, you're just simply doing steps. You're just trying to go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, going from dark to dark. On this one, you're trying to create transition gradation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start back here. Number 1 is still going to be white. 2 is going to be light. But what I'm going to do is, instead of starting right here, I'm going to start maybe halfway through the 2, really lightly. And I'm going to go up to 3 or 4. And I got to remember to show you what it looks like if you put the lines in and don't put them close together. But I'm just going to do this really, really lightly, and I'm not going to blend this entire thing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start blending in the middle and blend backwards, and hopefully create a little transition gradation between the 2 and the 1 to kind of give it a little bit of a fade. So I'm going to start up here, push in. Again, you can go back and forth or circular motions. That's up to you. Get some layers built up. I'll come back. I want to leave some white here, but I want there to be a transition gradation from the 2 to the 1. And because I have no pencil there at all, as long as this isn't too dark, it should create a nice little fade. And usually when students do this, they go way too light on this scale compared to this scale. This scale, they do a great job going 1 through 10, but here they're incredibly light. Try to use these, after you get this one done, use this as a guideline to see how you're doing. And it's going to be harder to get those transition gradations. So let me show you with 3 and 4 here. So what I'm going to do is, now I'm going to try to go halfway to 3. And I'm going to shade a little darker. And if you're scared, if you're a person that goes too dark, you might want to start at the dark end first. If you think you go too light, start at the light end first and work your way up. I'm going to go up to 5 or 6. Add a little more layering here. And just ask yourself, when you do this, is this 50% black? And this one probably isn't. It was just showing you an example. This probably is a little too dark for 2, honestly. Probably should have been more like 3. But we'll go in, we'll blend, we'll start up here, work our way back, because we need room for this to fade out. We don't want to overwhelm the values we already have there. And you want to fade. You want a nice transition gradation. If you need to switch out and create a new blending stump, that is totally fine. If you don't want to keep folding it back over and over on itself, get a clean blending stump and kind of create a soft transition gradation. When you're doing these, a good rule of thumb is to take maybe 2 white pieces of paper and just set them side by side and say, can I see a difference between 2 and 3? And I believe that I can. Could you see a difference between 3 and 4? Well, I haven't done anything to it yet, so you can't. But if you want to see, again, some examples of that, you can look at here's a student scale that someone did. So you can see light to dark. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Works from light to dark gradually. So does this one. Though some of the lines show up a little bit much. Again, these are just student examples that were left behind. They weren't the best in the room, but they weren't bad. That's why I thought I'd show them to you to give you an idea. Before we go from this part of the video, I do want to show you something. If you do lines and you just like scribble the lines really far apart like that and then try to blend them, you're going to be able to blend some of the lead. There's no doubt about it. You're going to be able to get the white of that paper darker. Let's see what shows up. The pencil line. So if you would, go ahead and create, if you haven't already, create yourself these value scales. Go from light to dark and light to dark. The difference is you're going to create transitions and gradations in here. And then when we come back to the next video, we'll show you how we'll do these.